There comes a moment when the person you become no longer feels familiar. Nothing dramatic happened. You still go to work. You still fulfill your responsibilities. You still smile when people expect you to smile. And from the outside, your life may appear perfectly normal. Yet deep inside, something feels different, as if you become a stranger to yourself. Many people experience this feeling and assume something is wrong with them. But what if this strange sense of disconnection is not a sign that you're broken? What if it's a sign that you're waking up? According to Carl Jung, some of the most painful moments in life occur when the person we've been pretending to be can no longer contain the person we're meant to become. In this video, you'll discover why so many people lose themselves without realizing it, why success and stability can sometimes feel strangely empty, and most importantly, how to begin finding your way back to the person you truly are. Because a feeling that you're losing yourself may actually be the first step toward finding yourself. There comes a moment in life that is difficult to explain. A moment when everything appears normal on the surface, yet something deep inside feels profoundly different. You wake up in the same bed. You follow the same routines. You go to the same job. You talk to the same people. From the outside, nothing seems to have changed. And yet, something feels missing. Not a person, not an opportunity, not even a specific dream. It's something harder to describe. A feeling, a strange sense that the person you have become no longer feels familiar. Many people experience this feeling without understanding it. At first, they try to ignore it. They assume they are simply tired. Maybe they need a vacation. Maybe they need a new hobby. Maybe they need to be more grateful. So they keep moving. They keep doing what they've always done. But the feeling remains. Quietly, patiently, waiting. Sometimes it appears late at night, when everything becomes silent. Sometimes it arrives during a normal day for no apparent reason. You could be driving home, sitting at your desk, looking in the mirror, and suddenly a thought appears. A thought that feels both frightening and impossible to ignore. How did I get here? Not physically, but internally. How did I become this version of myself? When did life stop feeling alive? When did excitement become routine? When did curiosity become obligation? When did I stop feeling connected to who I am? These questions can be unsettling because they challenge the story we tell ourselves. Most people believe that if they achieve the right goals, everything will eventually make sense. Finish school, build a career, find stability, create security, become successful, and yet, countless people reach those milestones only to discover something unexpected. The emptiness remains. The confusion remains. The feeling of disconnection remains. This realization can be deeply unsettling, because if success doesn't solve the problem, then what does? If achieving what you wanted doesn't bring the sense of wholeness you expected, where do you look next? For many people, this is the beginning of a silent crisis. Not the kind of crisis that makes headlines. Not the kind that others immediately notice. An internal crisis. A crisis of identity. A crisis of meaning. A crisis that asks a difficult question. Have I been living according to my own truth, or according to the expectations placed upon me? The uncomfortable reality is that many of us spend years becoming the person we believe we should be. We learn what earns approval. We learn what gains acceptance. We learn what makes others proud. And slowly, often without realizing it, we begin adapting ourselves to fit those expectations. We become responsible, productive, dependable, successful. But in the process, something important can happen. We become disconnected from ourselves. Not because we intended to, not because anyone forced us, but because survival often teaches adaptation before authenticity. From an early age, we learn which parts of ourselves are welcomed and which parts are discouraged. Certain emotions are praised. Others are criticized. Certain dreams are supported. Others are dismissed. Certain traits are rewarded. Others are hidden away. And little by little, we begin constructing a version of ourselves designed to navigate the world. A version that functions. A version that succeeds. A version that survives. But survival and fulfillment are not the same thing. A person can survive for years while feeling spiritually exhausted. A person can appear successful while feeling disconnected. A person can be admired by everyone around them and still feel like a stranger to themselves. This is why the feeling we're talking about today is so important, because it is not merely discomfort. It is communication. Something within you is trying to get your attention. Something is asking to be seen, to be heard, to be understood. Unfortunately, most people respond by distracting themselves. They become busier. They consume more entertainment. They fill every moment with noise, because silence can be uncomfortable. Silence forces us to confront questions we would rather avoid. Questions like, am I living the life I truly want? What parts of myself have I abandoned? What dreams have I ignored? What fears are controlling my decisions? Who would I be if I stopped trying to meet everyone's expectations? These questions can feel dangerous because they threaten the stability of the identity we've spent years building. Yet they also contain the possibility of freedom. Because a strange feeling that you no longer recognize yourself is not necessarily a sign that something is wrong. It may be a sign that something important is awakening. It may be the beginning of a deeper journey, a journey that countless people throughout history have been forced to undertake, a journey away from who they were told to be and toward who they truly are. But before you can find yourself, you must first understand how you became lost. And that is exactly where our journey begins. The truth is, most people do not lose themselves all at once. There is no single moment, no dramatic event, no clear turning point. The process is usually gradual. So gradual, in fact, that often goes unnoticed for years. You do not wake up one morning and suddenly become disconnected from yourself. Instead, it happens one compromise at a time, one adaptation at a time, one decision at a time. And because each step seems small, you rarely notice where the path is leading. Think back to childhood, before the expectations, before the responsibilities, before the endless pressure to become someone. Children possess something many adults spend their entire lives trying to recover: authenticity. A child laughs without worrying how it looks, cries without shame, explores without needing permission, dreams without limits. At that stage, there's little separation between who they are and how they express themselves. But as we grow older, the world begins teaching us lessons, some useful, some necessary, and some deeply limiting. We quickly learn that certain behaviors receive approval, others receive criticism. Certain qualities make people smile, others make them uncomfortable. Perhaps you were told to stop being so sensitive. Perhaps you were told to stop asking so many questions. Perhaps you learned that being quiet earned praise, or that being successful earned love. Without realizing it, you began adjusting, not because you were weak, because you were human. Human beings are wired for belonging. From an evolutionary perspective, acceptance once meant survival. Rejection could mean danger. And so the desire to belong became deeply embedded within us. This desire follows us throughout life, into school, into friendships, into careers, into relationships. Again and again, we adapt. We observe what is rewarded. We observe what is rejected, and we slowly shape ourselves accordingly. At first, these adaptations seem harmless. In many cases, they are learning social skills, developing discipline, respecting others. These are valuable parts of maturity. The problem begins when adaptation becomes self-abandonment, when pleasing others becomes more important than understanding yourself, when fitting in becomes more important than being authentic. Many people spend years climbing ladders they never truly want to climb, pursuing goals they never personally chose, living according to definitions of success that were handed to them by someone else. And because society often rewards this behavior, the disconnection can remain hidden for a long time. You receive promotions, recognition, approval, validation. Everything appears to be working, yet something feels increasingly off. A subtle tension begins growing beneath the surface. The tension between who you are and who you have become. The tension between your inner truth and your outer life. Most people try to solve this tension externally. They change jobs, move to a new city, buy something new, start another project, pursue another achievement. And while these changes can sometimes help, they rarely address the deeper issue, because the problem is not always outside. The problem is often the distance that is formed between you and yourself. Imagine wearing a mask every day. At first, it feels strange. You are aware of it. You know it is not your real face. But after years of wearing it, something unexpected happens. You forget it is a mask. You begin identifying with it. You start believing that the mask is who you are. This is where many people find themselves, living through identities they unconsciously constructed years earlier. The responsible one, the successful one, the strong one, the caretaker, the achiever, the people pleaser, the perfectionist. These identities often begin as survival strategies. They help us navigate challenges. They help us gain acceptance. They help us avoid pain. But eventually, they can become prisons, because every role requires energy to maintain. And when a role no longer reflects who you truly are, maintaining it becomes exhausting. This is why so many people feel tired in ways that sleep cannot fix. The exhaustion is not always physical. It is psychological, emotional, spiritual. It comes from constantly performing a version of yourself that no longer feels authentic. And perhaps the most difficult part is that from the outside, everything may appear fine. Your friends may admire your life. Your family may be proud of you. Others may see success. Yet inside, you feel disconnected. Not because you are ungrateful. Not because you are failing. But because something essential has been neglected. Your relationship with yourself. The modern world makes this even more difficult. We are surrounded by endless noise, endless comparisons, endless opinions about who we should be. Every day we are told how to look, how to think, how to succeed, how to live. And in the midst of all that noise, it becomes easy to lose contact with our own voice. The voice that knows what truly matters to us. The voice that recognizes what feels meaningful. The voice that quietly whispers when we are moving in the wrong direction. Most people do not hear that voice because they are too busy listening to everyone else. And that is why the feeling of disconnection often appears later in life. Not because it suddenly emerged, but because it has been building for years. The signs were always there. Ignored intuitions, unexplored passions, suppressed emotions, compromises that slowly accumulated over time, until one day, the distance between who you are and who you have become becomes impossible to ignore. And when that moment arrives, many people assume they have failed. But what if the opposite is true? What if the discomfort you feel is actually evidence that a deeper part of you is still alive, still calling, still waiting for you to remember who you were before the world convinced you to become someone else? To understand how this process happens, we need to explore one of Carl Jung's most powerful ideas. The hidden identity we create to gain acceptance. The mask we wear so often that we eventually mistake it for ourselves. Jung called it the persona. And understanding it may explain why so many people no longer recognize who they have become. By the time most people reach adulthood, they have become experts at being who they believe they are supposed to be. They know how to act in professional settings. They know how to avoid criticism. They know how to gain approval. They know how to present themselves in ways that others find acceptable. And while this may seem like maturity, Carl Jung believed something deeper was happening beneath the surface. According to Jung, every person develops what he called the persona. The word persona originally referred to the masks worn by actors in ancient theater, a mask designed to present a certain character to the audience. Jung used this idea to describe the social identity we create in order to function in the world. The persona is not fake, nor is it inherently bad. In fact, it serves an important purpose. Without it, social life would be nearly impossible. Imagine expressing every thought that enters your mind, every emotion, every impulse, every insecurity. Society would quickly become chaotic. The persona helps us navigate reality. It allows us to cooperate, build relationships, work with others, fulfill responsibilities. The problem is not having a persona. The problem begins when we forget that it is only a mask, when we become so identified with the role that we lose contact with the person underneath. This happens more often than most people realize. The successful executive begins believing that success is their identity. The devoted parent begins believing their role is all they are. The caretaker forgets their own needs. The achiever cannot rest. The perfectionist cannot relax. The strong person cannot admit they are struggling. Over time, the role consumes the individual, and what once served as protection slowly becomes confinement. Think about how many people secretly feel trapped by the image they have created. The person known for always being strong cannot ask for help. The person known for always being successful fears failure more than anything. The person known for always pleasing others becomes terrified of disappointing someone. They become prisoners of their own identity, not because anyone is forcing them, because they have spent years convincing themselves that the mask is who they are. And this is where the feeling of disconnection often begins, because beneath every persona lives parts of ourselves that were never allowed into the spotlight. The artist who became an accountant, the dreamer who became practical, the adventurer who became cautious, the sensitive soul who learned to hide emotion. The authentic self does not disappear. It simply waits, quietly, patiently, sometimes for years, and eventually it begins sending signals, a sense of restlessness, a feeling of emptiness, unexpected sadness, an unexplained longing, a desire for change that makes no logical sense. Many people try to silence these signals. They tell themselves they should be grateful. They remind themselves how fortunate they are. They focus on responsibilities. And while gratitude is valuable, it cannot replace authenticity. You can be grateful for your life and still feel disconnected from yourself. You can appreciate what you have and still know something important is missing. This is why so many people experience what appears to be a contradiction. From the outside, everything is working. Inside, something feels wrong. Jung believed these moments were not random. They were invitations. Invitations to begin the process of becoming whole. Because the goal of life is not to become perfect. It is not to become admired. It is not even to become successful. The deeper goal is integration, wholeness, to bring together the different parts of yourself instead of living through only one small fragment. Unfortunately, many people spend decades strengthening their persona while neglecting everything else. They build careers, reputations, identities, but never stop to ask one crucial question. Who am I when all of these roles are removed? Who am I when no one is watching? Who am I beyond my job, beyond my achievements, beyond my responsibilities, beyond the expectations others have of me? These questions can feel uncomfortable because they challenge the foundations of our identity. Yet they are also liberating, because if your worth depends entirely on a role, then losing that role feels like losing yourself. And life has a way of testing every identity we cling to. Careers change, relationships end, children grow up, bodies age, circumstances shift. The masks we relied on eventually crack. And when they do, we are forced to confront a question we have avoided for years. Who am I really? For some people, this confrontation arrives through a crisis, a divorce, a career collapse, a loss, a burnout. For others, it arrives quietly, a growing sense of emptiness, a persistent feeling that something is missing, a realization that the life they built no longer reflects the person they are becoming. At first, this can feel terrifying, because the persona provides certainty. It tells us who we are, what our role is, how we should behave. Without it, we enter unfamiliar territory. But according to Jung, this uncertainty is not a sign that you are lost. It is often a sign that you are finally beginning to wake up, because before you can discover who you truly are, you must first recognize who you are pretending to be. And once the mask begins to loosen, something else starts to emerge, something that has been hidden for much longer. The parts of yourself you rejected, the emotions you suppressed, the desires you buried, the traits you learned to hide, the side of yourself that Jung called the shadow. And for many people, this hidden part holds a key to understanding why they feel so empty, disconnected, and lost. Because sometimes the very thing we have spent years avoiding is a thing that can finally lead us back to ourselves. One of the most confusing experiences a person can have is achieving something they once desperately wanted and feeling almost nothing when it finally arrives. For years, you tell yourself, when I get there, everything will be different. When I get the promotion, when I buy the house, when I find the right relationship, when I have enough money, when I become successful, when people finally recognize my value. And for a while, the pursuit itself feels meaningful. The goal gives you direction. The struggle gives you purpose. The future gives you hope. But then something unexpected happens. You arrive. You achieve the goal. You reach the destination. And after the excitement fades, you find yourself asking a question you never expected to ask. Is this it? This question often creates guilt, because from the outside, your life may appear fortunate. Many people would gladly trade places with you. You have opportunities, comfort, security, achievements. So why does something still feel missing? The answer is uncomfortable, because what you're experiencing may have very little to do with what you have, and everything to do with who you have become. Many people spend years chasing goals that were never truly theirs. Goals inherited from parents, from culture, from social expectations, from comparison, from fear. The achievement itself isn't the problem. The problem is that success cannot satisfy needs it was never designed to fulfill. Money can create comfort, but it cannot create meaning. Recognition can create validation, but it cannot create authenticity. Achievement can create status, but it cannot create inner peace. This is why so many highly successful people privately struggle with emptiness, not because they failed, but because they succeeded at something that never addressed the deeper hunger within them. The hunger to know themselves, the hunger to feel aligned with their own truth, the hunger to live from the inside out instead of the outside in. For years, society teaches us to focus on external milestones. We become experts at measuring visible success, income, titles, possessions, achievements. But very few people are taught how to measure inner alignment. How connected am I to myself? How authentic is the life I am living? How often do I betray my own values to gain approval? How much of my life is driven by fear? How much is driven by genuine purpose? These questions rarely appear on resumes, yet they often determine whether a person feels fulfilled. Carl Jung understood something that modern culture frequently overlooks. A person can have everything the world says they should want and still feel deeply incomplete, because fulfillment does not come from becoming more impressive. It comes from becoming more whole. Imagine spending years building a magnificent house. Every detail is perfect. The architecture is beautiful. The rooms are elegant. Everyone who sees it admires it. But there is one problem. You never wanted to live there. The house impresses everyone else, yet it feels foreign to you. This is how many people experience their own lives. They have built something remarkable, but they feel like visitors inside it. The strange feeling that you no longer recognize yourself often emerges precisely at this stage, not during failure, during success, because success removes excuses. As long as the goal remains out of reach, we can blame our unhappiness on not having achieved it yet. But once we achieve it, we must face a more difficult possibility. Maybe what we were searching for was never outside us. Maybe the emptiness is not asking for another achievement. Maybe it is asking for self-discovery. This realization marks a turning point. For some people, it becomes the beginning of a deeper journey. For others, it becomes something they spend years trying to avoid. They chase another goal, then another, and another, always believing the next achievement will finally deliver the feeling they seek. But the feeling never arrives, because the deeper issue remains untouched, the relationship with themselves. There's a reason why moments of success often trigger periods of reflection. When the external noise settles, the internal voice becomes harder to ignore, and that voice asks uncomfortable questions. Whose life am I living? What do I truly want? What parts of myself have I abandoned? What dreams did I sacrifice to become acceptable? What fears are shaping my decisions? These questions do not appear to punish you. They appear to guide you, because beneath the feeling of emptiness lies valuable information. The emptiness is not your enemy. It is a message, a signal, a call to look deeper, a call to explore the parts of yourself that have been neglected for years. And this is where Jung's work becomes especially powerful, because he believed that many of the answers we seek are hidden in the parts of ourselves we avoid, the emotions we suppress, the desires we reject, the traits we deny, the fears we refuse to face. In other words, the answers often live in the shadow, the very place most people spend their entire lives avoiding. And until we are willing to explore that hidden territory, the feeling of emptiness tends to remain, not because we are broken, but because an important part of us is still waiting to be discovered. The journey back to yourself does not begin by becoming someone new. It begins by meeting the parts of yourself you left behind. And that journey starts in the place most people fear entering, the shadow. For most of your life, you have been taught to focus on the parts of yourself that are acceptable, the qualities that earn praise, the behaviors that gain approval, the traits that fit comfortably into society. But what happens to the parts that don't? What happens to your anger when you're told that good people don't get angry? What happens to your ambition when you're told not to stand out? What happens to your sensitivity when you're told to toughen up? What happens to your fear when you're told to be strong? According to Carl Jung, these parts do not disappear. They simply move into the unconscious, into a hidden psychological territory he called the shadow. The shadow is not evil. This is one of the greatest misunderstandings about Jung's work. Most people hear the word shadow and immediately think of darkness, destruction, or immorality. But the shadow is much more complex than that. It contains everything you have rejected about yourself, not only the qualities you dislike, but also the qualities you never allowed yourself to develop. In fact, some of your greatest strengths may be hidden there. Your creativity, your courage, your authenticity, your ability to speak your truth, your capacity for leadership, your passion, your spontaneity. All of these can become buried if they were discouraged long enough. Imagine a child who loves drawing. They spend hours creating worlds from their imagination, but over time, they hear the same message repeatedly. That's not practical. You'll never make a living doing that. You should focus on something more realistic. Eventually, the child adapts. They stop drawing. They pursue a different path. Years later, they become successful, responsible, respected, yet something feels missing. What disappeared? The talent never disappeared. The desire never disappeared. It simply moved into the shadow, waiting. The same thing happens with countless parts of ourselves. The confident child who became timid, the adventurous spirit who became cautious, the honest voice that learned to remain silent, the dreamer who became realistic. The shadow becomes a storage room for everything we decided was unacceptable. And the longer we ignore it, the more powerful it becomes. Because what remains unconscious does not stop influencing us. It simply influences us from behind the scenes. This is why people often find themselves repeating the same patterns over and over again. The same relationships, the same fears, the same frustrations, the same self-sabotaging behaviors. Consciously, they want change. Unconsciously, something keeps pulling them back. One of the most fascinating ways the shadow reveals itself is through projection. Projection occurs when we unconsciously attribute our own hidden qualities to other people. Think about someone who constantly irritates you, someone whose behavior triggers a strong emotional reaction. Perhaps you see them as arrogant, selfish, lazy, controlling, immature. Now ask yourself a difficult question. Why does this person affect you so strongly? Why them? Why not someone else? Jung believed that intense emotional reactions often point towards something unresolved within ourselves. Sometimes the qualities we dislike most in others are qualities we secretly fear in ourselves. Other times, they are qualities we secretly wish we possessed. For example, someone who constantly criticizes confident people may actually be disconnected from their own confidence. Someone who resents ambitious people may have abandoned their own ambitions years ago. Someone who judges emotional people may be suppressing their own emotions. The shadow speaks through these reactions, not to shame us, but to teach us. Every strong emotional trigger contains information about what remains hidden, information about what has been denied, information about what still seeks integration. This is why self-discovery can feel uncomfortable, because it requires honesty, not the honesty we show others, the honesty we show ourselves, the kind that asks, what am I avoiding? What am I pretending not to know? What truth keeps returning to my mind? What part of myself am I afraid to face? These questions are not easy. In fact, they may be some of the hardest questions a person can ask. Because confronting the shadow means letting go of the illusion that we are only our strengths. It means accepting our contradictions, our flaws, our fears, our insecurities. But something remarkable happens when we stop running from these parts. They begin losing their power over us. The anger we acknowledge becomes easier to manage. The fear we face becomes easier to understand. The insecurity we accept becomes less controlling. The hidden parts become integrated. And integration is one of the most important concepts in Jungian psychology. The goal is not to eliminate your darkness. The goal is to become conscious of it. Because a person who denies their anger is often controlled by it. A person who acknowledges their anger can choose how to express it. A person who denies their fear becomes imprisoned by it. A person who understands their fear can move through it. Awareness creates freedom, and freedom creates choice. This is why the journey into the shadow is not about becoming darker. It is about becoming more complete. The more of yourself you are willing to see, the more authentic your life becomes. And perhaps this explains something important about the feeling that brought you to this video. The feeling that you no longer recognize yourself. Maybe that feeling exists because too much of you has been left behind. Too much has been hidden. Too much has been sacrificed in the pursuit of acceptance, success, and certainty. The good news is that what has been buried is not gone. Your authentic self has not disappeared. It has simply been waiting for you to turn inward, waiting for you to listen, waiting for you to begin the journey home. And strangely enough, that journey often begins at the exact moment life starts falling apart. Because sometimes the crisis you fear most is the very thing that finally forces you to meet yourself. And that is what we need to explore next. If this message resonates with you, write the word awakening in the comments. Sometimes a single word is enough to mark the beginning of a new chapter. Now let's continue. Most people never plan to question their identity. They don't wake up one morning and decide to examine every belief, every choice, and every role they have played throughout their lives. In fact, if life continues smoothly, many never do. The routines remain comfortable. The distractions remain available. The mask remains intact. And so the deeper questions stay buried beneath the surface. But life has a way of interrupting us. Sometimes gently, sometimes violently. And when it does, the identity we have carefully constructed begins to crack. A relationship ends. A career collapses. A dream fails. A betrayal occurs. A loved one passes away. A health scare changes everything. Or perhaps nothing dramatic happens at all. Perhaps you simply wake up one day and realize you can no longer continue living the way you have been. Whatever form it takes, the result is often the same. The life that once made sense no longer does. The answers that once satisfied you no longer satisfy you. The goals that once motivated you no longer inspire you. And for a period of time, you find yourself standing between two worlds. The person you used to be and the person you have not yet become. This space can feel terrifying because certainty begins to disappear. The old identity is falling apart. The new identity has not yet emerged. You are no longer who you were, but you do not yet know who you are becoming. This is why periods of transformation often feel like chaos. From the outside, people may see confusion, instability, restlessness. But beneath the surface, something profound is happening. A deeper self is trying to emerge. Carl Jung understood this process better than most. He observed that psychological growth rarely happens during comfort. Growth often begins when the structures that once defined us start to break down. The job that defined you, the relationship that defined you, the image that defined you, the certainty that defined you. When these things collapse, it can feel like a personal disaster. And sometimes it is. There is real pain, real grief, real fear, but there is also possibility. Because every identity crisis contains a hidden question. If I am not who I thought I was, then who am I? This question marks the beginning of a completely different journey. A journey inward. For years, many people search for answers in the external world. They seek certainty through achievements, validation through approval, meaning through status. But eventually, life forces them to look somewhere else, within. And that is where true transformation begins. Unfortunately, this stage is often misunderstood. Many people believe that awakening should feel peaceful, beautiful, enlightening. But the truth is often very different. Awakening can feel like losing your mind before finding yourself, because before new truths can emerge, old illusions must fall apart. And illusions rarely leave quietly. They fight to survive. You may begin questioning beliefs you have held for decades. You may outgrow friendships. You may lose interest in goals that once consumed you. You may feel disconnected from people who no longer understand the direction you are heading. At times, it may even feel lonely, because transformation often requires leaving familiar territory. The person you are becoming may not fit comfortably into the life you have built, and that realization can be frightening. Yet this is exactly why so many people remain stuck. Not because they lack potential, not because they lack intelligence, but because they fear uncertainty. They fear letting go of identities that no longer serve them. Even painful identities can feel safer than the unknown. The mind prefers familiar suffering over unfamiliar freedom. That is why so many people continue living lives that no longer feel authentic. Not because they want to, because change requires courage. And courage is rarely comfortable. But consider this. The discomfort you feel during transformation is temporary. The discomfort of living as someone you are not can last a lifetime. One leads to growth. The other leads to stagnation. One expands your life. The other slowly shrinks it. This is why the crisis matters. Not because suffering itself is valuable, but because suffering often reveals what comfort conceals. It exposes false identities, hidden fears, unconscious patterns, unlived possibilities. The very things that need to be seen if genuine transformation is going to occur. Think about some of the most important lessons you have learned in your own life. How many of them came during easy times? How many emerged during periods of certainty? For most people, the deepest growth comes through challenge, not because pain is desirable, but because pain forces awareness, and awareness creates the opportunity for change. The person who experiences heartbreak learns something about attachment. The person who experiences failure learns something about resilience. The person who experiences uncertainty learns something about trust. Every crisis contains information. Every challenge contains a lesson. Every ending contains a possibility of a beginning. This does not mean you should enjoy suffering. It means you should not waste it, because the very experience that feels like it is destroying your life may actually be rebuilding it from the inside out. The strange feeling that you no longer recognize yourself, the restlessness, the confusion, the questioning, the uncertainty. These are not necessarily signs that you are falling apart. They may be signs that you are waking up. And if that is true, then the question is no longer, how do I go back to who I used to be? The question becomes, how do I move forward into who I am meant to become? That is the question that changes everything. And fortunately, there are practical steps you can take to begin that journey. Because finding yourself is not a mystical accident. It is a process that begins with small decisions repeated consistently over time. And in the next part of this journey, we will explore exactly how to begin finding yourself again. If you made it this far, you're already doing something most people never do, looking honestly at your own life. Subscribe to the Kingdom Within and continue this journey of self-discovery with us. Now, let's explore how to begin finding yourself again. At this point, you may be wondering something very simple. If I become disconnected from myself, how do I find my way back? The answer may surprise you, because finding yourself is not about creating a new identity. It is not about reinventing yourself overnight. It is not about becoming someone completely different. In many ways, finding yourself is a process of remembering what you have forgotten, recovering what you abandoned, reconnecting with what has always been there beneath the noise. And while every journey is unique, there are several principles that can help guide the way. The first is this: slow down enough to hear yourself. This sounds simple, but in today's world, it is surprisingly difficult. Most people spend their lives surrounded by constant stimulation, notifications, conversations, entertainment, responsibilities, endless information. The result is that they become experts at listening to everyone except themselves. The voice of the world becomes so loud that their own inner voice becomes almost impossible to hear. Yet the path back to yourself begins with silence. Not because silence contains magical answers, but because silence reveals what has been buried beneath distraction. Many of the questions you've been avoiding will eventually emerge when the noise disappears. And while that can feel uncomfortable, it is also necessary. You cannot reconnect with yourself while constantly running from yourself. The second principle is equally important. Pay attention to your energy, not your productivity, not your achievements. Your energy. There are activities that leave you feeling more alive, and there are activities that leave you feeling depleted. There are conversations that expand you, and conversations that shrink you. There are environments that nourish your spirit, and environments that slowly drain it. Your energy is constantly providing clues about who you are. The problem is that most people ignore those clues. They continue living according to obligation rather than awareness. But your energy rarely lies. If something consistently makes you feel more connected, more engaged, more present, it deserves your attention. Likewise, if something repeatedly leaves you feeling empty, exhausted, or disconnected, that information matters. The third principle is to question inherited beliefs. Many of the assumptions guiding your life were never consciously chosen. They were inherited, absorbed from family, culture, friends, teachers, society. At some point, you accepted them as truth. But are they? Do you truly believe what you believe? Or have you simply never questioned it? This is one of the most powerful forms of self-discovery. Not asking, what should I think? But asking, what do I actually believe? The difference is enormous. Because authentic living begins when your choices emerge from your own values rather than borrowed expectations. The fourth principle requires courage. Face what you've been avoiding. Most people know exactly what they are avoiding. A difficult conversation, a decision, a dream, a truth, a fear, a change they know they need to make. The mind often disguises avoidance as logic, as timing, as preparation, as caution. But deep down, you usually know the difference. You know when something is genuinely impossible, and you know when fear is simply wearing a convincing disguise. This is why Jung's famous observation remains so powerful. Where your fear is, there is your task. The places you avoid often contain the lessons you most need to learn, the opportunities you most need to explore, the growth you most need to experience. The fifth principle is perhaps the most important of all. Stop waiting to feel ready. Many people spend years preparing for a life they never begin. They wait until they feel confident, certain, motivated, fearless. But confidence rarely comes before action. Confidence comes from action. Clarity comes from action. Growth comes from action. You discover who you are by engaging with life, not by endlessly thinking about it, not by endlessly analyzing it, not by endlessly planning it, by living it. This is one of the greatest misunderstandings about self-discovery. People imagine they must first find themselves and then act. In reality, the opposite is often true. You find yourself through action. You learn who you are by testing your limits, making mistakes, trying new things, taking risks, experiencing life directly. The person you are becoming is revealed through participation, not observation. And this is why so many people remain stuck. They are waiting for certainty. But certainty is rarely available in advance. Life reveals itself as you move, not before. Imagine standing at the edge of a dark forest. You cannot see the entire path. You cannot see the destination. You cannot even see what lies around the next corner. But with every step forward, more of the path becomes visible. The same is true of your life. You do not need all the answers. You only need the courage to take the next step, then the next, then the next. Over time, those steps create momentum. Momentum creates confidence. Confidence creates transformation. And transformation gradually reconnects you with yourself. Perhaps not all at once, but little by little, day by day, choice by choice, until one morning, you begin noticing something remarkable. You feel more present, more authentic, more aligned, not because your life has become perfect, but because your life has become yours. And that changes everything. However, there is still one obstacle that prevents many people from taking that first step, an obstacle so powerful that it quietly controls countless decisions. Fear. And if you truly want to find yourself again, you must understand the role fear plays in your life. Because fear is not always the enemy. Sometimes it is the compass. Fear has a strange way of shaping our lives, not only through what it makes us do, but through what it prevents us from doing. Think about how many important decisions are influenced by fear. The career you never pursued, the conversation you never had, the opportunity you never explored, the dream you never acted on, the relationship you never left, the truth you never spoke, the person you never allowed yourself to become. Most of the time, fear does not announce itself openly. It rarely says, "I am controlling your life." Instead, it disguises itself as practicality, as caution, as responsibility, as waiting for the right time, as needing more certainty. And because its voice sounds reasonable, we listen. Years pass, opportunities disappear, possibilities fade, and slowly, without realizing it, we begin constructing a life around avoidance, not around purpose, not around growth, around safety. Now, there is nothing wrong with safety. Safety has value. It protects us. It provides stability. It helps us survive. But there is a danger when safety becomes the highest priority, because growth almost always requires stepping beyond what feels comfortable. This is why Carl Jung made one of his most powerful observations. Where your fear is, there is your task. At first glance, this idea sounds intimidating. Who wants to move toward fear? Most people spend their lives trying to move away from it. But Jung was pointing toward something deeper. He understood that fear often appears at the edge of transformation. Fear frequently guards a doorway to growth. Think about it. Why are you afraid of speaking your truth? Because doing so could change your relationships. Why are you afraid of pursuing a meaningful goal? Because failure is possible. Why are you afraid of changing your life? Because the unknown feels dangerous. In every case, fear is standing between who you are and who you might become. This does not mean every fear should be followed blindly. Some fears are protective. If you're standing at the edge of a cliff, fear is wisdom. If situation is genuinely dangerous, fear serves an important purpose. But many of the fears that dominate modern life are different. They are psychological fears. Fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of embarrassment, fear of failure, fear of disappointing others, fear of not being enough. These fears rarely threaten your survival, but they often control your future. And the longer they remain unchallenged, the more powerful they become. One of the greatest illusions fear creates is the belief that avoiding discomfort will create peace. But avoidance rarely creates peace. It creates stagnation, temporary relief, long-term regret. Many people spend years avoiding difficult decisions, yet the decision itself was never the real source of suffering. The suffering came from postponing it, from carrying it, from allowing it to occupy space in the mind every single day. Fear grows in darkness. It grows when ignored. It grows when left unquestioned. But something remarkable happens when you face it directly. It begins to shrink, not because the fear disappears, but because you discover that you are stronger than you imagined. Every meaningful transformation begins with a moment of courage, not certainty, not confidence. Courage, the willingness to move forward despite uncertainty, the willingness to act despite discomfort, the willingness to trust yourself despite fear. Consider the moments in your life that change you most. The decision to leave a toxic situation, the choice to pursue a dream, the conversation that needed to happen, the risk you finally took. Chances are, fear was present in every one of those moments. Yet so was growth, so was freedom, so was transformation. This is why fear can become a compass, not because it always points toward the easiest path, but because it often points toward the path that matters. Ask yourself honestly, what am I avoiding right now? What conversation have I been postponing? What truth have I been refusing to acknowledge? What dream have I convinced myself is impossible? What part of my life no longer feels authentic? These questions matter because your answers reveal the edge of your current identity. They reveal the place where growth is trying to happen, the place where the old version of you is beginning to dissolve, and where a new version is waiting to emerge. Many people imagine that transformation feels like becoming someone else. In reality, Transformation often feels like removing what was never truly you. The fears, the masks, the expectations, the limitations, the stories you inherited, the stories you told yourself. And beneath all of it, something genuine begins to appear. Not a perfect person, not a fearless person, a real person, a whole person, a person willing to live authentically. And that is why fear deserves your attention. Because beyond many of your fears lies a life you've been searching for. Not necessarily an easier life, but a more meaningful one, a more authentic one, a life that feels aligned with who you truly are. And when you begin following that path, something extraordinary happens. The strange feeling that brought you here starts to change. The feeling of being lost begins transforming into direction. The feeling of confusion begins transforming into clarity. The feeling of disconnection begins transforming into self-understanding. Not overnight, but gradually, as you move closer and closer to yourself. And ultimately, that is what this entire journey has been about. Not becoming someone new, but returning to who you have always been. Which brings us to the final and most important part of this journey, the return to your true self. There is a moment that arrives in every meaningful transformation, a moment when you stop asking, how do I become someone else? And begin asking, how do I become more fully myself? At first, the difference seems small, but it changes everything. Because for most of our lives, we are taught to pursue improvement, to become more successful, more productive, more attractive, more accomplished, more accepted. And while there is nothing wrong with growth, many people spend so much time trying to become more that they forget to ask a simpler question. Who am I beneath all of this? Beneath the achievements, beneath the expectations, beneath the fears, beneath the roles, beneath the masks. The strange feeling that brought you to this video may have convinced you that something was wrong, that you were losing yourself, that you were broken, that somehow you had gone off course. But what if that feeling means something entirely different? What if the discomfort you've been experiencing is not a sign of failure? What if it is a sign of awakening? Think about it. The people who are completely disconnected from themselves rarely question their lives. They rarely stop to reflect. They rarely examine their beliefs. They rarely wonder whether they are living authentically. The very fact that you are questioning yourself may be evidence that a deeper part of you is trying to emerge. A part that can no longer tolerate living unconsciously. A part that wants something real, something meaningful, something true. Carl Jung believed that the purpose of life was not perfection. It was individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are. Not who your parents wanted you to be, not who society expected you to be, not who fear convinced you to be, but who you actually are. This process is not easy. It requires courage, honesty, patience, and above all, willingness. The willingness to see yourself clearly, both the light and the dark, both the strengths and the weaknesses, both the dreams and the fears. Because wholeness is not achieved by eliminating parts of yourself. It is achieved by integrating them, by becoming conscious of them, by accepting them, and by learning how to use them wisely. The anger you feared may contain your boundaries. The sadness you avoided may contain your healing. The fear you resisted may contain your next step. The shadow you rejected may contain your greatest strength. Nothing inside you is meaningless. Everything has something to teach. Everything has something to reveal. And perhaps that is the deepest lesson of all. You do not find yourself by escaping your experiences. You find yourself by understanding them. You do not find yourself by avoiding discomfort. You find yourself by moving through it. You do not find yourself by becoming perfect. You find yourself by becoming whole. The journey inward is not a straight line. There will be moments of clarity, and moments of confusion, moments of confidence, and moments of doubt, moments when you feel deeply connected to yourself, and moments when you feel lost again. This is normal. Growth is rarely linear. Transformation is rarely comfortable, but every step matters. Every moment of awareness matters. Every act of courage matters. Every honest conversation with yourself matters. Because little by little, something begins to happen. The masks become lighter. The fears become smaller. The noise becomes quieter. and your own voice becomes clearer. You begin making decisions that feel aligned. You stop living entirely for approval. You stop measuring your worth through achievement alone. You stop chasing identities that no longer belong to you. And for the first time in a long time, you begin feeling at home within yourself. Not because your life is perfect, but because your life is authentic. Because you are no longer abandoning yourself. Because you are no longer hiding from yourself. Because you are finally meeting yourself. The truth is, there comes a moment when the person you become no longer feels familiar. That moment can feel frightening. But now you understand something most people never realize. That feeling is not necessarily the end of who you are. It may be the beginning of a deeper relationship with yourself, the beginning of genuine self-discovery, the beginning of a life lived consciously rather than automatically, and perhaps most importantly, the beginning of your return, not to the person you used to be, but to the person you were always meant to become, because the kingdom within has never disappeared. It has been waiting for you all along, waiting beneath the noise, waiting beneath the expectations, waiting beneath the fear, waiting for the moment you finally turn inward and remember who you are. Final CTA. If this video resonated with you, subscribe to the Kingdom Within and join a community dedicated to self-discovery, inner transformation, and conscious living. And before you go, leave a comment below. What part of yourself are you ready to rediscover? Your journey inward may inspire someone else's journey too. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep awakening. And remember, the greatest kingdom you will ever discover is the one within.